So, first of all, thanks CSA for having me talk here. Thank you to Paolo for hosting us. We've probably all heard quite a lot about the term zero trust even before today. There seems to be a theme. But what I want to talk you through today is actually how to cut through the hype and actually understand how you can start to operationalize zero trust in your organization without buying new tech. So first of all, a little bit about me. I'm Graham Gold. I'm a cloud security engineer at Admiral. I've been in IT for way too long and recently became an author, quite by accident, so details on the screen. My co-contributor, who can't be here today, Patricia, she works with me at Admiral. And what I'm going to talk about, we actually came up with together. She's way more qualified than me, including with some CSA stuff. Nice plug. So what I'm going to walk you through is a little bit of a journey about what zero trust is, what it absolutely isn't, and then how you start to operationalize that. And we'll introduce a framework that we've developed internally called Cloud Application Security Model. So what is zero trust? Well, fundamentally, it's about continuously assessing the authorization, the access for every application, not just at the start of a session, but continuously throughout that. Why is that important? Well, cloud. Anyone can access anything from anywhere. And all the different metrics about whether you trust something or not are constantly changing. So zero trust is really a mindset shift, and it moves you away from that network as your perimeter control is the only thing that matters. Really to a defense in depth posture where actually network security, yeah, important, but there's a whole bunch of other things you need to consider. So what is zero trust not? It's not a single product. You may hear marketing that will tell you otherwise to sell your product, and some of those products probably can really help you on that journey, but it's a mindset. It's also not fire and forget. And hopefully you've kind of got that from some of the other talks today. You have to continuously assess your risk and assess your posture. So where this all started for us was nothing to do with zero trust. It started like many things do with a bunch of engineers trying to solve a problem, recognizing that there were some security posture that we could improve. There was some existing tooling we had that could help us with it. And the sage words of one of our architects: don't come up with a control that ties us into a specific piece of technology, because you change vendors, technology changes. Does that piece of technology still operate in the same way in 18 months or 3 years? Very unlikely. So we started to come at this from the perspective of what we really care about is enabling the business. So you want to provide business enabling security controls. So you have to be aligned with what the business goals are. You want to be consistent, because if you take 10 security professionals and ask them to design a security control for something, how many versions of that control do you get? And how many are actually effective? I think we all have experience of that. But again, putting the business first and foremost in what we're doing. It's the reason we exist, is to protect that business and enable that business. So in terms of problems you want to solve, the elephant in the room is shadow IT. And I don't have to explain what shadow IT is, but the whole thing with the adoption of cloud is, and I know someone referenced that someone with a credit card isn't the risk they used to be, but it still kind of is. Not every business has the same maturity in terms of, can you see that someone's accessing a cloud service that you didn't know about, that you didn't authorize for use? It's not universally true that everyone can do that. And the business also want to adopt these cloud services to move fast, to seize business opportunities, and you don't want to get in the way of that. But what that means is all the traditional threats you had, data leakage, malware, and others, the impact is amplified, and the likelihood of those incidents increases. So we started off initially thinking, well, what are all the bad things that could happen that we need to protect against? We quickly realized that we could be there a very long time, and that's always changing. TTPs change all the time. Technology vulnerabilities change all the time. So we decided to flip it on its head a little bit and say, well, actually, what does good look like? What do we expect our business to be doing? Let's start with that. How do we do that in a secure way? And then how do we design controls for that consistently? So this diagram really talks about the mindset that we had So first of all, you've got to observe, you've got to be able to see what's going on. If you can't secure what you can't see, right? It's a bit of a trope, but it's still true. So first of all, if you get good insight, good logging. Second of all, what do you need to care about in terms of the attributes of that user session? So what is the identity? What has it got access to? What's it trying to do? What data or applications is it trying to get to? And then what's the regulatory framework? What legal compliance things have you got to ensure in your business? Finally, take some action. So respond, observe, analyze, respond. So the more we thought about that and we looked at not just what we wanted to add as new controls, but looking at existing policies, we realized, like I said before, you throw lots of people at something, you've got lots of variations of solving that problem. If you're not consistent, you're probably going to sleepwalk into a problem where your controls aren't effective and you haven't noticed that your controls aren't effective. So start off by defining what good looks like. You automatically block a lot of the stuff that you would have considered bad by caring about allowing but securing what you define as good. And to the shadow IT problem, you will probably not realize there's certain things your business are doing. But when you start to get that visibility, you'll start to see that. Maybe you'll accidentally block it because you didn't know it was there, but then you start to iterate over time. You understand your business, you enable your business. So with that, we ended up coming up with what we call the cloud application security model. And the intent with that, as I say, was to try and promote consistency. So if I've got lots of security engineers, risk professionals, consultants, how do we make sure that we all have that same general mindset so that our controls are consistently effective? So CASM, and I'm going to say CASM because if I keep saying the full thing, I'll trip over it, is made up of 5 core pillars. You kind of seen them on the previous slide: visibility, identity, data, legal and compliance, and enforcement. Those pillars have capabilities, things that we need to be able to do, and requirements, things that we need to be able to achieve, objectives for the business. And we layer them. And again, you've seen observe, analyze, respond. So we group them in layers just in terms of focusing that thinking. So obviously the first one, key one, visibility. Say it again, you can't secure what you can't see. Now, I've mentioned that you don't necessarily have to buy more technology, and that's true. That doesn't mean to say that from a zero trust perspective, there isn't going to be increased cost. One is you're asking people to change their mindset. So that takes effort. So that is cost, but you're not buying tooling. Second one is only ingest what you're going to act on from a logging perspective, or your SIEM costs are going to go through the roof. So be intentional. And if sometimes you decide to be a little bit exploitative and turn some stuff on to see what you see, that's cool as an experiment, then turn it off and work out, okay, what use cases could we actually act on now that we know we've got that level of visibility? Next one's identity. And I was going to use a line that Paul just mentioned about identity being the new perimeter. It is and isn't true. The core thing with cloud is it's not stuff sitting in your data center. It's stuff everywhere. Somebody else's data center being accessed on a mobile device, Internet of Things, you name it. So it's not just about, oh, perimeter control, protect my data center, I'm good. Your perimeter really kind of is the identity because that's the universal thing about accessing applications, services, you name it. And to kind of backstop that, so in Google's Threat Horizon report, looking at the first half of 2024, they actually state from their research, and that's including research from Mandiant, so I kind of think they've got a good handle on instant response, that 47% of cloud compromises that they observed were to do with identity, weak identities, stolen identities, missing credentials, unauthenticated access. So really identity is crucial. But what do we mean by that? What's the source of that identity? Does it come from your identity provider? Is it a guest? What's normal for that user? What are they doing day to day? Does that change? Would you know if that changes? You've then also got to think about, I'm deliberately saying identity and not users. So why is that? You've got your traditional human users, you and I logging onto an app. You probably, if you don't yet, will soon have nearly as many non-human identities. service accounts, service principals? Do you monitor them the same way you do humans? I'm guessing that answer is quite variable, right? Depends on your business, your regulatory environment, the maturity. But actually, that's going to explode very soon. Wouldn't be a talk without mentioning AI. And the only thing I'll say about AI is that the generative AI trends, if you follow it, is that agent-based AI is about to take off as the next wave in the AI hype. So that then means you've got agents doing things, not doing automation that you as a human developed and asked the AI to run for you. It's going to develop automation on the fly, and it's going to have its own identity or identities. So you will soon have more non-human than human identities. And I'm not sure that everyone's actually ready for that. You know, we struggle with what we've got already. And if there's anything with AI, the adoption will be rapid. So it's going to be a problem sooner than you think. Data, fundamentally, we wouldn't exist without it. Whether it's customer data, whether it's your intellectual property. If you don't have data, you don't have a business. And these days, you've got a huge amount of data analytics, even itself as an industry. So nothing that's on that slide is new. It's things we've been wrestling with from a regulatory perspective for years now. Data ownership, data sovereignty, data integrity. So then leading on into regulatory, you need to have, as part of that framework, ensuring that you're always compliant. So moving away from the mindset of a quarterly audit, an annual audit, what you really want to be getting to a position of is that you're continuously assessing the compliance of every activity every single time. And then audit season could become easier. It's not the sit down with an auditor for several weeks, giving them screenshots. It's go and look at the portal, there's all the evidence. There's also evidence of where we drifted out of compliance, or we caught it and remediated it. And if that sounds utopian, remember, and I'll touch on this later, it's a journey. You're never done. So finally, enforcement. What are you going to do with what you've observed and the metrics you've observed about the identities, the location, and other factors that you've got visibility of? You're going to take some action. Now, in the pre-cloud world, and for those of you still hybrid, which I would imagine is most of us, you don't always have the same level of granularity of logging that you do in cloud services. Sometimes, it depends. You don't also have sometimes the same granularity of capabilities. But in the modern tooling and the cloud native tooling, it's not a simple binary allow or block anymore. You can start to take granular actions where you say, based on the risk, maybe I won't block that, but maybe I'll modify the session. So what do I mean by that? Well, I'll give you two examples. Shadow IT. So you observe someone accessing a SharePoint instance. Okay, cool. SharePoint, very legitimate service. You possibly even use it yourself. But what if it's not your SharePoint tenant? So now you're worried about data leakage. But would you automatically block SharePoint as malicious? No, you wouldn't, because you're going to shoot yourself in the foot, right? So you start to be able to say, well, if I detect use of a cloud service that I've got metrics that tell me it's not risky, but it's not my tenant, don't block it, but I won't allow you to paste into the session. I won't allow you to upload files. Carry on doing what you do and access that data, but I don't have a data leakage worry anymore. And you can do that automatically without anyone else getting involved. Then you can also start to say, well, but maybe someone should know about that. Maybe supply chain security needs to know about that to assess it and decide to bring that into management as an authorized app because they weren't engaged, right? Anyone with a credit card still can go and buy a cloud service and use it in minutes. Some businesses are really mature at being on top of that, but it varies. So you can start to automate the response and fine-tune your controls automatically. Other example that I would give there, well, actually two more. So on the flip side, if someone's going and accessing mega.com, nefarious file sharing site, just block it, right? You know that's bad. And depending upon the security tooling you've got, like CASBs and others, and again, I'm not saying you have to buy new stuff. You may have some of this stuff. You may not be fully using it as you could. But if you've got any kind of metric about the risk of that service, you can then take automatic decisions about that. Flip side to that would be many businesses now might want to allow their staff to access personal email on a corporate device, where years ago that was like, no, you're just not going to do that. So you can start to say, well, I'll let you access your Gmail, your Outlook, whatever. But again, I won't allow you to upload. I won't allow you to paste. And actually, you can do things like block certain actions. So you can say, I'm not going to let you send an email. So it's about granular risk-based controls to try and enable the business, but actually without putting the business at risk. Oh, your battery's low. I mentioned layers. I'm not a fan of just talking through every word on a slide, but just to say that there's a certain natural grouping of these around that flow of observe, analyze, respond. So we've kind of grouped them into layers for that reason. So to make it a little bit real and a little bit less theoretical, the way that you want to think about this is your application access flow. So for every activity that happens, every single time, this is what you want to be happening. But forget about automation for now. If you were going to start to try and adopt this, look at your existing controls, or look at a new application you want to bring in and assess it using this. So start off with location. What do you know about the location? Is it a trusted location like a corporate network? Is it a rogue nation? Is it an IP with bad reputation from a bad actor perspective? And assign these scores that are meaningful to you in terms of your risk appetite or your risk posture. So as an example, you might say, trusted location, I'll score that 30 points in the positive. Tally the scores as you go through the whole application access. If it's someone coming from China, maybe I deduct 30 points. I don't trust that so much. You then start to look at the identity. What's the source of that identity? Is it in your Active Directory? Is it a guest account? What's the type of access? Is it administrative, standard user? Have they passed MFA? And so on and so forth. And there's more than just what I've put on the screen. So what have you got visibility of? What can you measure? And how much do having these or not having these give you either trust, so you give it a positive score, or risk, so you give it a negative score. Next, you're going to move on to device. Is it a corporate device? Do you have EDR on it and some view of, can you trust it? What's the posture of it? Is it bring your own device? What operating system is it? And you apply a score, positive or negative according to the device. Next, you've got the application and the data. So is it a trusted application? Is it a risky SaaS service? Is it your data? What's the sovereignty rules around it? And again, come up with scores. I've deliberately not put scores here because I've put scores that are specific to us and our risk appetite. And the point is not to prescribe what your business's risk appetite should be. You know what you're comfortable with, what you're not, what your regulatory requirements are. So it's less about what score you should give. It's more about this thinking of, does this increase my trust or increase my risk? Next, you've got constraints. So again, it might just be block, it might just be allow. It might be I want to make you go through MFA again, or I want you to change your password and re-MFA because I'm getting signals from identity provider that actually maybe there's significant user risk with your credential. Again, it will depend on your tooling. And then out-of-band process. So seems so we're all familiar with, but you may want to trigger, as I mentioned earlier, a notification to supply chain team. We've spotted a new SaaS service. It's low risk, but you guys should be aware of it and be managing it and making sure it's got ownership, governance, and all that good stuff. You may even trigger other automation, like Azure automation, you name it. Once you've done that manually for controls, you can then start to think about, based on the tooling I've already got, how much of that can I automate? How much of that can I do for every session, at the start of the session and all the way through? Continuous access evaluation, which you'll have heard of from OIDC. So that mindset of nothing static, it's always changing. Something about that will change, that you have to assess and decide, do I still trust this? And do I still trust it to the same degree? Maybe I do, maybe I don't. So apologies, after lunch, a nice big table on the slide. I'm not going to talk through it line by line. What this really was we decided to eat our own dog food. Okay, we've produced a nice internal white paper, but does it stack up? Does it work? So we reviewed a whole pile of security policies that we'd done a security posture assessment for something and decided, actually, I want to come up with some new policies to increase our posture. Let's test those new policies using CASM. A real world acid test. Is this great in theory, but in practice doesn't really work? And then you can start to see some common themes there. What do I know about the location? What do I know about the identity? What do I know about the device, the data? In some cases, what constraints can I apply? And how do I score them? And again, demonstration purpose only, they're not Admiral internal scores. But you can start to then see the impact, positive or negative, for each attribute that you can measure and that changes. So you've got PEP as a policy enforcement point, which is actually something that CISA, I think, came up with first. So you can start to see the impact of all these different metrics. One thing I want to call out that's really, really important here is that we all talk about having granular security policies. I only want to allow this, I only want to allow that. It's quite easy to actually forget to apply that granularity in any kind of policy exception. So example here, I want to only allow access to an application if you pass MFA and your device is trusted or your location is trusted. Say I've got an application that does not work with MFA, right? For whatever reason, it breaks. Okay, cool, I'll just add that application to the exception for that policy. Well, the application will now work, but now it also can work from any device and any network, even if that was never the intent. So as much as you have to be granular about enforcement to enable your business, you've got to be granular about your exceptions. So I think that's a case for justifiable complexity. Sometimes a few more versions of that security policy where you've got granularity in what you accept or exclude is an important thing to think about. An example in that one that I'll give you, so I've got a friend who's been a security consultant for many years, and he was on an engagement with a client, got furloughed over Christmas, as is common for contractors, comes back after an extended break, 7 weeks, fires up his Chromebook that he used just for that client with his nice browser profile. Boom, straight in. No MFA, no nothing. Oh, but we disabled your account when you're off. Yeah, but what about the auth token? Did you revoke that? No. So again, it's about being intentional about what can you measure, what can you control, and what should you control. Talked about dogfooding it a little bit. So what we did was, one, group them into bandings of scores, really because humans don't really work well in talking numbers to each other, right? So example there, if that total score, looking at all the attributes I can measure, was less than 200, well, that's really high risk, and I'm never going to allow that. All the way up to 200 or more, well, that's a really good session. There's lots of really good things about that I can trust. You can use as many bandings as makes sense for your business. You could align them to your risk matrix, or you could just have your consultants use this to help them arrive at a risk scoring for your risk matrix. It's kind of up to you how you do that. But again, make it something that humans can work with, not just, oh, well, this is 110 and I'd rather it's 150. What does that actually mean? So I did say that none of this started with zero trust in mind, and it really didn't. It was engineers going, that could be better. How do we make that better? And then as we were going through all this process, I read a blog post going through, at that point, a recently updated version of CISA's zero trust maturity model, and realized quite quickly, this aligns really quite nicely with what CISA's doing. But one, that's quite good because maybe we're not, too far off the beaten path. We're kind of going in the right direction. But actually, in my opinion, you can tell me if you agree or not, I think CASM helps you actually operationalize that. That's quite a weighty document, but this is actually about, okay, cool. But in practice, day to day, how do you actually do zero trust? Forget tools. How do you operate it? How do you know it's working for you? Now, there's a couple of statements in that document that I'm going to call out because I either agree or disagree. First one, I think, is fairly agreeable. Fundamentally, it requires a change in your culture and philosophy to do zero trust. I think that's true for most businesses. Secondly, the path to zero trust is incremental and it could take years. Yeah, you're not going to do that level of change overnight. It is iterative. Finally, initially, it requires costs for buying new services and new capabilities. Bold statement, but I disagree with Sizer. Yes, if you want to go full tilt on this and be the best you can be, you're probably going to have to buy some tools. But the whole point of this entire talk is you don't need to start because it's a mindset. So Sizer seem to recognize that because in their own paper, they've got a table that is far more complicated, this with far more columns, but it says the same thing. Maturity for zero trust is a journey, it's not a destination. You might start down here, traditional, manual static policies, manual provisioning. You might be somewhere on that path, but the job's never done and it is iterative. So like I say, Sizer kind of recognize that. But as I said earlier, I do recognize people changing behavior is still effort, is still cost. And if you suddenly start logging all the things, yeah, okay, that's cost. But the point is you can probably use your existing tools to start to do this because it's more about mindset. Mindset is king on this one. And again, I'll reiterate, have you got EDR? Probably. Are you getting metrics from that that could help on some of these parts of the framework? Yeah. Do you have network security controls? Do you have next-gen firewalls? Again, you've probably got tech that's starting to give you that level of granularity to do this. Some of the cloud-native stuff does have broader monitoring capability and deeper logging capability. Some of it does have more granular enforcement options. But to use a term we all hate and use a lot, it depends. So back to the use case we came up with for Admiral. Why do any of this other than from a security lens? Well, you're trying to enable the business. So what we came up with is top level use cases, which are technology agnostic, outcome based. What are you trying to achieve for your business? Shadow IT discovery and management. Yeah, why wouldn't you want to do that? Safe browsing and cloud service usage. Why wouldn't you want to do that? Safe data processing and sharing, again, makes sense. Now, when I document these internally, they're a bit more wordy, but they're still non-technical, trying to avoid jargon, trying to make it about business outcomes. Because what you want is that security and the business are talking the same language. Okay, but what about all that detail? You, as a security professional, need all that detail. You're still going to have controls documented, and those control documentation is still going to be technical. But then what you do is you link to this supports this use case. So again, you go to the level of detail you need as a security professional, but keep it outcome-based, technology agnostic, high-level use case that you and the business agree with. So not sure how I'm doing on time. I think I'm actually kind of where I wanted to be. So with that, I'll just ask, yeah, thank you for your time, and I'll ask you for any questions. Yep.
When you've tried to implement that in the organization, have you come across any problems with having multiple policy enforcement points and how you sort of bring all of that data together and do enforcements against multiple PEPs?
Yeah, so in terms of where we are in our journey at the moment, we have developed it, we've tested it in terms of some new policy sets that we are implementing. We've now gone through the kind of architecture forums to check that actually the architects get it, understand, agree with it. And now we're going through a little bit of tweaking some of the language internally to match architecture language, and then it gets operationalized. So we've dog food new policies. We are just on the cusp of actually rolling it out to security professionals to go and live with, because we think we've proven the value enough to say, let's go and start doing this. But I think to that point, those are definitely challenges you'll have. Have you got a single platform where you've got lots of tools from lots of vendors with varying capabilities? But again, it's about, forget the technology. What are you trying to achieve? What can you measure? What can you act upon? And it's going to be constant iteration and maturity. You're not going to solve it in day one, and even if you did, the job isn't done, in my opinion. Yeah.
Good afternoon. Firstly, thank you so much for such a brilliant insight on the Zero Trust. My question is, with so much focus on zero trust, what are the key challenges, as per your experience, which the company faces while implementing it on the practical level on a cloud environment?
I think the biggest challenge is scale and complexity. Even if you're using one cloud provider and then multiple SaaS services, do they all give you the visibility you want? Probably not. Referencing the app Omni talk earlier, they probably don't give you the login they want until a security researcher calls them out on it, and then now you get the logging. Microsoft with Midnight Blizzard started giving extra logs that they used to charge you extra for to US government customers after they got breached. Those challenges won't go away. They might get better because of security researchers calling that stuff out, but then we'll just find something else to be not as good at as we should be, right? If you abstract cloud and technology, actually, how much of this is net new in terms of a problem? It's not really. It's just that with cloud, we're doing a lot more, a lot quicker, with far more reach. So they're old problems made large. We've not really learned. And if you look at one of the things that I find a challenge as a security engineer, you're never ahead, you're always behind, because every single company, whether it's the company you work for or the company that provides the tooling that you use, what do they care about? Do they care about doing it right, or do they care about being first to market? You know the answer. So they're never going to be as secure as you should be from day one. So it's really just about, what are your business goals? What are the outcomes you're trying to achieve? What can you measure? What can you affect? And just constantly going through that loop. So for example there, in a year's time, might there be some identity-based metrics that I can measure that I wouldn't have dreamed of now? Possibly. You're never actually done in security, but it's about the mindset. What do I care about? What does the business care about? In my opinion, anyway. Any more? Yeah.
I'm just curious to know, how do you differentiate between good and good enough when it comes to those metrics?
That's a good point. And that's deliberately why I didn't put scores on the slide, because who am I in one company to decide what every organization's risk posture is and risk appetite is? Can't do it. And vendors try, and I've got tooling which takes a view of, okay, we've told you all the bad stuff in your environment. Here's what we think you should focus on. That's always going to be balanced across their entire customer base. And there'll be bits of what vendor X says you should care about that you don't in your business, and bits you totally do. So that's why you've got to come up with the scores that make sense in terms of your risk appetite. So if you think, well, okay, somebody passing MFA isn't as important as what the industry tells me, I'm going to score that less. I care more about that's coming from my identity provider, so I've got good insight. So I'm going to score that higher. And if it's a guest, I'll score it lower. That's where you have to really adapt it to your business, because I don't know your risk posture. You do. You know what keeps you up at night. You know how your business operates. So it's a very deliberate attempt to say, I'm not going to tell you what your scores should be. It's a framework. Does that answer your question? And also, age-old answer, it depends.
Much operational overhead does, looking into identity access management, does it reduce operations, or does it add to a lot?
I think it adds before it subtracts, because most businesses are not great at identity governance and access. They're not great at privileged access. And they're all working on that, and they've all got tooling on that. But how many of you can say that you love everything about how you provision identities, manage them, how you deal with privileged access? There's always things we'd love to do better. And then you're trying to balance that against business outcomes. So you've always got that trade-off, what's good enough? And again, without sounding like I'm dodging the question, it's very business-centric. What's good enough for you? You're welcome.
I was just going to make a couple of comments.
Yeah.
The first comment is, I see you use the CISA
Yeah.
maturity model. The only people in the world who do a 4-level maturity model rather than the industry standard 5, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
I'm pleased to say that CSA, when they adopted that. It's actually a 5-level maturity model for the,
Yeah.
for the CSA version of maturity model. And the other one was your comment about AI,
Yeah.
or agents.
Yeah.
And again, the original work that dates back to 2011, 12 out of Jericho said identity is for entities, not people.
Yeah.
And entities are people, devices, organizations, code, and agents.
Yeah.
I'd like to think we got it right sort of some 12, 15 years ago.
I think that's really writ large in what we're looking at today, isn't it? It's come to fruition.
Yeah, and certainly CSA have been expanding that definition because now it's identity workloads,
Yeah.
as you saw from the guidance document.
Yeah. No. Let's say hopefully it was useful. Hopefully you've got insights. If you've got questions, hit me up before I leave as well.